Good morning! The goal of this video is to give you something very easy to use, something very easy to apply, some language patterns that are already ready to apply. You won't have to know any kind of theory behind how the language works, behind how exactly this NLP pattern works and how does that relate to the other one. It is just a few phrases that you can use right away, no matter what is the situation or the problem you want to solve with your persuasion skills. It was designed to be the part of a paying course that I was designing, and at the end I thought, okay, let's just put it for free. So I just wanted to give you guys that for free. There are examples of the Milton model inside those 57 language patterns. There are examples of the meta model. There are examples of the sleight of mouth model, of the submodalities overlapping language, and tons of other stuff. But the point is, none of it is explained in theory. It's just very brutally ready to use, so you will just have to read, to just take the ones you like and just start to apply them. They are ready for this. It's for people who don't really have time for theory, who want to move faster in life. So you can pick any of them, and you can just pick them in the description. I have put all of them and put the according link to which moment of the video I am describing them. You can either just pick them and stop the video now, or you can listen to the explanation of how exactly to use those patterns in which situation and how they should be used. Or you can just jump right away from the links in the description. You can just jump into any one of them that you like, or any of the ones you don't really understand. And you can just come back to it later or as you want. There are two main ways of learning those language patterns, the ones you have in the description. There are two main ways. The first one will be to, instead of memorizing, because I don't believe in any way in conscious memorization, I think it is a huge waste of time, as in school as it is in other aspects of life. I think it is much more about kinesthetic intuition, if I can put it that way. The idea would be to not memorize, but use all of them on yourself. It is the first way of learning them. You take a problem you have. Maybe you have a problem at your job right now. Maybe you have a problem with anxiety. Maybe you are really stressed. Maybe you have a problem with in your relationship with your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, or with your parents, your kids. Just take a big problem you have right now and use all of those language patterns to see, to notice, to hear how those language patterns are shifting the problem. And there is at least 2 or 3 of them, or even 10, 20, but let's say 2 or 3, at least 2 or 3 of them that are going to help you in ways you didn't anticipate. Because what this whole language, whole language patterns do is shifting your perception and shifting the way your neurosynapses are connected to find new solutions, and you open possibilities, because people curse themselves all day long with their own limitation through language. With this kind of language in this video, you can open possibilities instead of restricting it. So by using all of those patterns on yourself for your specific problem, curiously you will notice a shift at some point, either a kinesthetic shift, or you will have an ah moment, a sound of ah, like this, or maybe you will see the solution appearing in your mind. What of those? Usually this is majorly a kinesthetic shift, that is a breathing, a relief of like this, because you have just asked the question you needed to reframe, to reshape the problem, and you will see clearer in your mind after doing it. And just by doing this, you will have such an imprint in your body that it will be so much simpler to use it in your real life, because it will be simpler to memorize, to remember it, if you have had yourself a huge shift with it. Just trying to memorize them one by one, by repeating them in your head like this, is a huge waste of time. Okay, stop trying to memorize them, just use them on yourself, and your unconscious will perfectly know which ones to use and which ones not to use for your specific situation. The second major way of learning that is to just pick, if you don't want to use them on yourself, or if you don't think it is something that is going to help you, just pick 2 or 3 of the ones you like. Just skim through in the description, or just follow the whole video and just pick 2 or 3 you really like, you know how you could use them, and start in the next 3 days. For the next 3 days, you just your goal is to place them in as many conversations as possible, is to use them in a conversation as many times as possible. No matter who you are interacting with, no matter who is the person in front of you, no matter what is the topic of the conversation, your goal is to use those 2 or 3 language patterns as many times as possible. So it is the 2 major ways of you learning them. Just pick the one you like and enjoy. And before we get into the actual description of what they are and how they should be used, there are a lot of them where I have been writing down if, like if you just had 3 wishes, if it was easy to. Okay, whenever I write if, whenever I start a language pattern by if, you can also replace it by when. If is much more softened, it is much more smoothened, it is much easier to make it acceptable by the person if there is some lack of rapport. However, if you already have a lot of rapport with the person in front of you, then you can simply use when. When is much more direct. When is really directing the mind of the person, whereas if is much smoother and will be much better if there is some huge tension with the person or if the person is not really in rapport with you yet. So let's get into it. The first one, what is it like when you? This one could be used to create a state, to evoke a state, to evoke an old memory of some solution. What is it like when you find solutions easily? What is it like when you're completely motivated? What is it like when you completely agree with somebody? What is it like when you drop the tensions and start to feel a relief? No matter what is the state you want to create, you want to induce, you can use that phrase to trigger it. Maybe I'm going to use some details in the first ones that I'm not going to use in the next ones because I will have already been repeating it for 50 times. And the next one, have you ever, is kind of the same idea, just a different way of saying it. And a lot of those language patterns would be kind of the same thing but said differently, so that you can really choose the one that fits the most your own way of communicating, because maybe some words resonate better in your ears and some don't resonate in the right way. So like between what is it like when you and have you ever, you can just pick the one you enjoy the most. So have you ever felt joyful? Have you ever been able to get over a limitation? Have you ever bought something you really enjoyed in a sales meeting to close the deal? Have you ever enjoyed something you have just bought? Have you ever went home and you realized how cool it was to have bought the thing you have just bought? For example, just one random example, you don't have to use this one. Number 3, I wonder if. This is kind of an embedded question in the Milton model. I wonder if it is used to ask a question, but that could be too direct, to ask directly to the person. I wonder if you could just quit that person, that toxic person you're linked to, in a kind of a toxic relationship with a parent, with a boyfriend, with a whatever. I wonder if you could just leave that person for good. It is a way of asking a difficult question, but that is putting up much less resistance from the person. Or at least the question is much less likely to put resistance into the person because it is softened. I wonder if you are pretexting asking a question to yourself, whereas actually you are asking a question to the subconscious of the person listening to you. Number 4, what is the most important thing for you in? This one is what we call a value elicitation. What is the most important thing for you in life? What is the most important thing for you in a career, in your job? You could ask that question if you're some headhunter and you are trying to find the best person for the job. You could ask this: what is the most important thing for you in your job, in a career? And then you would find out if that person really have the values that are matching the company you want to hire him for example. Number 5, if you could simply, this one is another way of throwing a lot of embedded commands. If you could simply let go of your tension, if you could simply let go of all this anxiety, if you could simply start to tell me how much you love that person, well, whatever, just a way of inserting some embedded command. Number 6, or, the use of or. Use of or is what we call the double bind. You're going to present two different choices, but those two choices are just leading to the same conclusion. It is just that by using or between the two choices, you are lowering once again the amount of potential resistance that person may have, because you are appearing as offering a choice. So what kind of resistance should be put against you if you just offer a choice? You're not trying to force. Say, do you want to enjoy that video entirely, or do you prefer to enjoy it step by step and come back to it later? In any case, I am going to make you watch the whole video. It is just that I am offering a choice, an illusory choice, between two things that are going anyway to the same result. You could ask somebody in a therapy context, do you prefer to learn how to deal with your anxiety, or do you prefer to handle your problem in a way you will never have anxiety again? In both cases, it is the same thing. It goes to the same result. But since you are framing it as a question separated by or between two ideas, then the conscious mind of the person would have much less resistance against you, if there was some. Number 7, my best friend Todd told me. This one is in the whole family of quotes and maybe sometimes metaphors too. Quoting somebody else destroys completely the resistance, and I think it is one of the patterns I have used where I have kind of never encountered any resistance, or like maybe 1 out of 100 times is really unlikely, because when you are not stating directly something, it is very difficult for the conscious mind of the person to refute what you say, especially if the person you are quoting is a source of authority. My friend Todd may not be a source of authority, or my friend Kevin, or my friend Janet, or whoever you want to talk about. In the best case, to quote somebody who is a source of authority. That way the conscious mind of the person would once again have much less resistance, diminish all the resistance. If I tell you, you should believe that hypnosis is good for you, maybe you just think that I don't know what I'm talking about, and you don't want to believe me completely. If I start to say Milton Erickson was explaining how hypnosis can help you, and if on top of that you know who Milton Erickson is, whoa, then there's the statement, the suggestion I'm giving has much more weight, because it comes from somebody who is knowledgeable and an acclaimed source of authority on the topic. So you can adapt that with whoever person you know who is a source of authority in the topic of the conversation you have. Number 8, when you say to yourself. When you say to yourself is a way of suggesting, of programming the inner voice of the person you're interacting with, of your subject. When you say to yourself, it would be included in a series of statements like the thing with hypnosis is that it is really helpful because blah blah blah, just random thoughts about it. And at some point you would switch the pronoun and you would say, you know, it is like when you say to yourself that you want to experience a state of letting go and you don't know yet how to do it. Experience a state of letting go. It is an embedded command, but by using the whistle phrase say to yourself, when you say to yourself, you are intuitively programming the mind of that person to repeat the phrase of the background. You know, it's like when you say to yourself that blah blah blah. If the person trusts you, he or she will probably start to repeat the phrase in the back of his mind, as long as there is rapport between the two of you. Repeating the phrase in his mind, that way it would be like a TV commercial. It would play in the background. If you program correctly the inner voice of that person, it would play the embedded command again and again and again, up to the point where the person just acts upon what you have been programming. You evil hypnotist. That's what I get all the time. Number 9, if you had just 3 wishes. This one is the one that I like to use to uncover more of the internal map of the territory of the person. If you just had 3 wishes, if you were just meeting some genius and you just had 3 wishes, some how is it called? Not Green Lantern. Those guys from the movie. I don't remember, but some genius who is like the blue guy in Aladdin, who is giving you 3 wishes. And you just ask the person, if you just had 3 wishes in the world, what would it be? Or in a more specific situation, if you just had 3 wishes with your situation at hand, with your partner, with your relationship, with your job, if you just had 3 wishes, what would it be? It could be anything you want in an imaginary world. What would it be? It will allow you to understand much more of who exactly are you talking to, what exactly is the internal world of the person, what kind of beliefs and values are attached to that person and are attached to the limitation, if you're in the therapy context, are attached to the limitation of that person. It's kind of a way to uncover a lot of things like this. If you had to describe, number 10, if you had to describe it without using the word pain, for example, just if you had to describe this problem you have without complaining, how would you describe it? If you had to describe this problem you have without talking about that person, like a guy who has a conflict with his father, if you had to describe the problem without naming your father, what would you be describing? That way you would shift the attention of the problem back on the person who is stating that he has a problem. It is very powerful to help the person to take the responsibility back over his feelings and over his states, over his beliefs, so that he can start to change them by himself and not anymore complaining about some outside source that he doesn't have any control upon, like your father is an alcoholic. Yeah, like there's nothing you can do about it, but you can shift your feelings about it and what you think yourself about it. This is something you can change, but changing somebody else who doesn't want to be changed, no, it's like very unlikely, if not impossible. So if you had to describe it without, it would just open possibilities to force the person to think in a different way, make his mind go in a different direction, and make him use his words, his language in a way that empowers him and lets him see that the limitation he thought he had may actually not even be a limitation. Maybe it was just a self-imposed limitation, which is actually always the case. Like everybody who go in therapy just have self-imposed limitations. It's never an actual physical limitation, or almost never. Number 11, what is your intention when you? This one comes more from the sleight of mouth model, or it could also be described as a classic reframing method. What is your intention when you do this or that? Or what is the intention of that part of you? Maybe it was no. Yeah, it was the next one. What is your intention when you? What is your intention when you complain about your boss? What is your intention when you cry? What is your intention when you complain about your boyfriend, about your girlfriend? What is your intention when you came to me asking me to help you? What was your intention by doing this? It is kind of, once again, uncovering the inner world of the person and to understand much more what are the hidden beliefs associated with the problem you are dealing with right now, or the overall conversation you have right now. What are the hidden assumptions linked to that situation right now? Number 12, which part of you is, so it is also kind of the linked to the whole reframing idea, which part of you is responsible for this problem? Like you have a smoking problem. Which part of you is responsible for this? Which part of you is making you smoke? Which part of you is allowing you to maintain that negative behavior of smoking? Which part of you is making you so good at craving smoking? Lots of ways of reframing the actual limitation and turn it into a potential solution, or at least opening the possibilities that will lead to a solution. So which part of you is? Like it is dissociating the person from his problem. From there you can start to make him talk about his problem as just being one part of him, and not anymore, I am an alcoholic, I am an addictive person. No, there is an addictive part of myself. So if it is only an addictive part of yourself, then how can you deal with that? Much easier, because if you are into a stuck state, very difficult. If it is just a small part of you, now you can start to notice from the outside and, what can I do with this? It's much easier that way. Number 13, can you imagine if and a negative consequence? Can you imagine if and you complete with a negative consequence? This one is linked to what we call the Scrooge pattern that Tony Robbins was doing a lot. Letting people imagine something very negative that is going to happen in their life if they maintain the negative behavior they have. If you eat too much, if you are an overweight person, if you eat too much, can you imagine if you go on eating like this for the next 10 years? What is going to happen exactly? Can you imagine, like in a toxic relationship, can you imagine if that person keeps making you struggling, if that person keeps imposing his own or her own rules upon you? What is going to happen years from now? Just helping the person to see how bad it is going to be in the future if he doesn't act now. It's also something Bandler has modeled from a lot of people he had interviewed who could get over a phobia or an overall problem by themselves, with no help, just by themselves. He modeled that one of the essential components was they got so fed up of their problem that they couldn't stand it anymore and said goodbye. So by pushing the pain a little bit, and this can be tricky depending on the situation, so I wouldn't recommend that one for every possible problem. It depends on your experience, who is exactly the person, what is the personality of the person you have in front of you. There's a lot of factors to it, but it is one way, pushing the pain up to a point where the person cannot stand it anymore and realize that no, I have to act today, now, not tomorrow, not 1 year from now, today. Is one way of shifting the focus by helping people to get away from pain, because the pain would become too overwhelming for them. And also because if somebody is maintaining a feeling of pain for a long time, there is some positive intention behind it. There is something positive about it. Otherwise, your mind would just drop it and would just have been dropping it long ago. What prevents you from? This one, it comes from the meta model. Number 14, what prevents you from the meta model? What prevents you from, this one is usually used with model operators like I cannot feel confident, I cannot succeed at my job, I cannot pass my exam, I cannot be happy in a relationship. What prevents you from it? What prevents you from being confident? What prevents you from being happy in your relationship? What prevents you? This one is very useful to break that generalization and shifting the focus on what is actually the belief behind that. There is some belief associated with the situation at hand. What exactly is that? I cannot be happy in a relationship. Instead of asking why, because with why we'll just have bullshit conscious reasons, you can start to ask what prevents you from being happy in the way you want? What prevents you from making that amount of money every month? What prevents you from getting out of debt? I know this one may be tricky for some people, I know, sorry, but sometimes it can be useful. What prevents you from telling your boss to shut up? Losing your job, and so what? What's going to happen? So this one is very helpful to deal with the limitations again. What prevents you from? Number 15, some people can. Again, some very basic Milton model way of using embedded commands. Some people can feel completely grateful for what they have all day long. Why not you? Embedded command, feel grateful all day long. Some people can feel grateful all day long. Number 16, for the sake of my understanding. This one is it's like it is the same idea as I wonder if, like the embedded question. For the sake of my understanding, it is about softening the idea you want to communicate. For the sake of my understanding, could you tell me why you cannot succeed at your job? For the sake of my understanding, could you explain to me what is going wrong in that relationship you have? Just to understand, once again, what is beneath the surface, what are the things the person doesn't want to talk about, but asking for it in a much more softened way. So the person wouldn't get defensive. The person would be much more open to communicate about it with you, because you have been softening. For the sake of my understanding, could you explain to me this, that? Always keep a soft tone of voice, like a friendly tone of voice, would be much easier. If it was, number 17, if it was easy to, opening possibilities in the mind again. If it was easy to overcome your problems tomorrow, what would it look like? If it was easy to tell your boss to shut the fuck up, how would you do it? If it was easy to start a new life, where would you start? Just to open the possibility, just to open the imagination, because the imagination is much more powerful than knowledge, which is actually the phrase I have just here. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited, imagination encircles the world. Thank you. Because whatever you can imagine, whatever the mind can conceive, you can achieve it. So if you can just make the person imagine something he or she thought was impossible, you have already won, almost. So if it was easy to do this or do that, then you will just make the person imagine, which is an incredible first step into making somebody change. If it was easy to do this or that. Number 18, what if you could, my hand starts to get, number 18, what if you could? What if you could is kind of, when I said what prevents you from, it was about the model operators in the meta model, and it was about turning the attention on the past. What prevents you, or what has been preventing you from doing this, from starting a new life, whatever. By saying what if you could, or what would happen if you could, what would happen if, you're doing the same thing, shifting a model operator that is used for a limitation, but you're shifting it on the future this time. What prevents you from is shifting on the past, and what if you could is shifting on the future. What if you could once and for all say shut up to your boss? What if you could once and for all, what would happen if you were changing your country? What would happen if you were finding the job of your dreams? What would happen? It is just to break all the statements of I cannot, I must not, like I must not quit my job. What would happen if you would? What would happen if you were actually quitting your job? What would happen? Just to gather some information. And maybe this question is not going to lead to a positive solution, but at least you will get closer to it, because you will make the mind of the person move in a different direction. And sometimes by asking all those kinds of questions, you don't actually get the powerful solution on the actual moment. But you make the person think so much in different ways that the day after or 2 days later, he will find a solution by himself. Because you have been helping him to move his mind in so many different directions that it becomes usually easier. Number 19. Number 19, how does this can mean that? Also coming from the meta model, how does this mean that? It is about reframing cause and effect limitations, which are basically beliefs. Once again, once you have uncovered a very negative belief, you can reframe it and change its negative aspects by asking, how does this mean that? A very simple one I was using all the time with this one is I have always been polyamorous. I have always been with multiple women, and always in an honest way, always communicating about it with complete honesty from the beginning, never lying to anybody, always complete honesty. Now, sometimes when I talk about this with some girls and they tell me, well, when you love somebody, it's impossible to be with other people, which is a belief, because like genetically speaking, you can perfectly be in love with several people. But for somebody who would be trying to drag me down with this kind of statement, I would simply ask, how does being in love prevents you from loving other people? And then like 90% of the time I would just get a blank face of, actually I guess you're right. Yeah, of course I'm right. And for the other ones, I just need one or two more questions and I just break their belief. I don't want to make them change their mind about their own relationship, but I want to make them accept that that I can do something they cannot do. And that it is my right to do it, even if they don't like it. As long as I don't hurt anybody, I have the right to do anything I want. So this was a great way I had to reframe this limitation. Like, it's impossible to have multiple relationships. How does having one relationship prevents you mean that you cannot have other ones? How does having one partner means that you cannot have any other ones? How exactly? How exactly do you prove that in your internal world? And when you ask questions like this, people will just get blocked. Or like, how being a Democrat means you are a piece of shit. Or in the reverse, how being a Republican means you are a piece of shit. Like, it's just linked to beliefs, to internal beliefs. It's just subjective. There is nothing in itself, by itself, that is proving that. It's just your subjective reality. Anyway. The next one, number 20. Number 20, in a world where this or that is possible. In a world where quitting your job at any time you want is possible. In a world where magic wands are existing, what would you do with it? In a world where every parent would be loving and attentionate, how would you have been raised up? How would you have been growing up? For the case of somebody who would have had trouble with his parents. In a world where your parents would always have been loving with you, what would be different today? And then once again you open possibilities. You could just make him imagine, oh, actually I could behave that way. Good, so why don't you do it? Just do it, just start doing it now. It's time to do it. Number 21. If the goal was actually to, this one is from the sleight of mouth, another outcome pattern. If the goal was actually not what you have been trying to do, but something else. Example, if the goal in a conflict with somebody, very simple, in a context where somebody is having an argument with you, if the goal was actually to find one thing we agree upon, what would it be? If the goal was not to argue against each other, but to actually find one thing we can agree on, what would it be? And start from there. Start from the least possible piece of thing you are agreeing with. You are agreeing on with the person in front of you. That way it will be so much simpler than to find positive agreements for whatever other topic you have. Number 22. Isn't it more important to, this one is called the hierarchy of criteria in the sleight of mouth model. Isn't it more important to, like, same thing, if we just have an argument for hours and hours, isn't it more important to care about what we love than just fighting about what we hate? Really? Isn't it more important? Or you can phrase that as an open-ended question. What is more important to you than fighting against me? What is more important to you than fighting against that person? If you have some guy who is always fighting with his girlfriend, what would be even more important to you than proving who is right between you and your girlfriend, or the reverse between you and your boyfriend? What would be even more important? Isn't it more important to maintain a healthy relationship and raise your kids in the proper way, rather than knowing who is supposed to wash the dish every night? Things like this. You can just move the mind in different directions with this. Number 23. I am not telling you to go into a trance right now, very classic one. Coming from the Milton model again, I am not telling you to this or that. It is a negation that allows you to throw embedded commands again. I am not telling you to trust me to the point of letting go completely. I am only telling you to start to listen to me in a way that is going to shift your mind, or I don't know. Just, I am not telling you to. It lowers the resistance, because on the conscious level, oh, he's not telling me. Oh, cool, I'm relieved. But on the unconscious level, I am programming the mind. I am not telling you to this or that. Number 24. If your best friend was in the same situation, I really like this one. It is about perceptual position. If somebody else was in your situation, what would he do differently? And usually the best friend is a good example, is a good thing, because usually most people's best friend has a lot of resources and solutions and good ideas. When you're lost, what is one of the first things you do? It is calling your best friend, because you are lost. You don't know anymore what to do. So asking the question, if your best friend was in the same situation, what would he do? Or what would she do? If your best friend was in that situation, what would happen? What would have not happened already if your best friend had always been in that situation from the beginning instead of you? What would have been different so far? And because it is the best friend, it is really easy to find what kind of mental patterns that person could be using, because it is your best friend, so you know a lot of things about him or her. So it is really easier to ask that question to somebody. If you had been growing up with different parents, this one would be essentially for the case of somebody having conflicts with his parents. If you had been growing up with different parents, what would be different? Okay, the person gives you an answer, you listen to it, you pay attention, you listen carefully, and you accept the answer. What if you had been growing up with different parents, and once you get the answer, you can simply ask, okay, great, what prevents you from doing that right now? From living that right, from experiencing that right now? Because if you can phrase it with words like you just did, it means your mind is able to conceive it. So if your mind is able to conceive it, then what is preventing you from doing it, or from doing it on a constant basis? And you will get much deeper into the core of the limitation by asking this. Maybe you won't get the solution just with this single question, but you will get closer to the core of the problem. And maybe by getting to the core of the problem, you will encounter something that you didn't even anticipate, and that the person did not anticipate neither. In therapy or in coaching, very often, more in therapy, coaching is usually about scaling to something bigger, and therapy is usually by dealing with something bothering in the present or dealing with something bothering in the past. It's just my own model, but it is a model I like, so listen to it, please. By asking questions like this, you will discover sometimes that people come for a problem to you. People come and ask you about a problem, but actually what they need has very often nothing to do with what they want, with what they ask you for, unless they know NLP, they have been trained to recognize their own subconscious patterns and stuff like this, or trauma release or stuff like this. Otherwise, very, very often when people ask you, like, I want to quit smoking, no, actually, they don't want to quit smoking. They want to deal with the cause that is provoking different symptoms, and one of those symptoms is smoking. This is a much better way of thinking about this. People never come because they have a food addiction or a porn addiction, or because they smoke too much. They come because there is some negative thing in their mind and in their life that is causing those negative symptoms. And this is what they need. But it is very often way too buried beneath the surface for them to really verbalize it right away when they come to you, if you're a therapist or a hypnotist or coach, NLP practitioner coach. Yeah, you know my point on this practitioner bullshit. Some are really good, but not many. Anyway, how many words? Where was I? I'm not telling you too, sure, but number 26. How many words do you know for? I love this one. How many words do you know for pain? Or if the person say, my problem is that I'm always way too angry. Okay, how many words do you have for anger? How many words do you have for angry? And by shifting through different synonyms, or if the person speaks different languages, you can make him verbalize the word or the words into different languages, because every word has a kinesthetic encore to it. Or like most words in your language have kinesthetic encores. Somebody might say, I love not freedom, but I love power. I love having power. Some person might think that power equals Hitler. Okay, everybody has a different definition for vague words. So instead of just debating about some very vague word, like somebody telling you I have an anger problem, or like I have a concentration problem, and you might say, yeah, but actually if you're too focused and too concentrated on this thing, you might lose completely your family because you would forget them, because you would be too focused on your job. Something like this, just to explain that everybody has a different definition for some words. Like I need more concentration. Some people could have a disagreement or conflict upon the word concentration. I'm losing my words. So by asking how many different words do you have for this, you will probably fall upon one that opens possibilities once again, fall upon a version of that word or of that limitation related word that the person is imposing onto himself, that will open possibilities and solutions once again. So how many different words do you know for describing your problem right now? How many different ways do you have of describing it? Number 27, I really love this one. 10 years from now, how will you remember this moment today, for example? I love all those 10 years from now, 1 year from now, tomorrow, back in the day, because it is shifting the perception of time. Your unconscious basically doesn't have any understanding of time. Something really, really bad may have been happening to you 6 months ago, and you could still remember it. You could still be scared the shit out of this thing. It could still scare the shit out of you as if it was happening now, even though it was 6 months ago. So the unconscious doesn't have any understanding of time, and for that reason, you can always shift the perception of somebody just by changing the tense of your words, just by changing the times of your verbs. 10 years from now, how will you remember? Shifting the perception, this limitation you have right now. 10 years from now, when it will be over. 10 years from now, when it will be over, how will you remember today? It is like a time distortion, double distortion. You make the person go into the future and you make him think back of today. That way you create so many different representations that were not there yet, that the person will be like almost overwhelmed with new choices. With this one, I never encountered any kind of resistance neither. The quotes and time distortion, double distortion, never encountered any resistance from people probably with this. Number 29, 1 year from now, how bad is it gonna be? Linked to the Scrooge pattern again. 1 year from now, how bad this smoking habit is gonna be? Like to create some added pain that is going to help the person get into the propulsion system that is going to make him go out of this pain. It's like a butt kick, a little bit of butt kick to help the person realize how shitty his life is going to be if he doesn't act today. It's kind of helpful sometimes. Number 30, I am not telling you to, I probably wrote this one twice. Sorry about that. Number 21, just deal with that. Number 31, the best way I know of going into a trance, the best way I know of dealing with a problem like yours, the best way I know of letting the tension drops, the best way I know of loosening up and dealing with all those stressful situations. Embedded commands, just the best way I know of blah blah blah. Embedded commands, very simple stuff. Number 32, when I had a similar problem, I did what? Just if you know the solution, but it would be too difficult for the person to think that it is that simple, you could talk about it almost like quoting yourself, like using a metaphor but with yourself. When I had a similar problem than yours, Robert, the way I dealt with that, the way I handled it was and you just give the process that person needs to overcome the problem. The way I dealt with that was by imagining that I was seeing myself on a screen and being able to shift the movie as if I was director. And I would reprogram my own mind like this and blah blah blah. You're just making the person integrate that the change is possible through dissociation, for example with this one. It's very powerful. Number 33, could you be more specific? When somebody is giving you way too abstract words, I'm stressed all the time, or very too generalized. I'm stressed all the time. Nobody loves me. My boyfriend always makes me unhappy, or my girlfriend always makes me unhappy. Could you be more specific? How exactly did you know that, for example? Could you be more specific? It will allow you to, once again, get all of the beliefs and presuppositions associated with that problem. It is also, generally speaking, the meta model. When you know the meta model but you don't know exactly which part of the meta model you should apply on this person, then just say, could you be more specific, please? For the sake of my understanding, could you be more specific about this or that? Number 34, if you had to describe it to an alien, I love this one. If you had to describe it to an alien, Describe it to an alien who doesn't know shit about how the human world works. Describing it to an alien who has never been on planet Earth. How would you describe that? He will train the person to use different words, different terminologies, to shift, as I said, the kinesthetic anchors to the words he has. Because if you had to describe your problem to somebody who doesn't know what humans are, you would need to use much more flexible language to be able to make that person, that alien, understand the problem. Therefore, it will train you to shift your representations by using your language in a different way. Number 35. If you had to describe this problem without words, which can be linked to 34. If you had to describe this problem without words, just by using your gestures, what would you do? This one has tried to kind of submodalities overlapping, because if some, or like synesthesia, sometimes synesthesia or submodalities overlap is used to break a limitation, to use a new resource. Because if somebody, for example, is blocked into on the auditory level, like he's talking to himself all day long with some negative voices, or he's hearing his father or his teacher, his pastor teacher, or his boss telling shit about him all day long. Okay, so the problem is on the auditory level, listening to a voice. If you had to describe what those voices mean without using words, without using voice tonalities, how would you express it? With your body, with your eyes. And just this little shift will allow the person to access more parts of his brain, because he will have to access the visual cortex to make this representation, and to access much more of his kinesthetic body connections to actually create the representation. So it is kind of using submodalities and the brain structure to overcome limitations, to open much more possibilities, much more solutions. Number 37. A lot of people before you have learned to. This one could be similar to when I said, when I had a similar problem, the way I dealt with it was in doing this or that. A lot of people before you have learned to this. A lot of people before you have learned how to go into a trance easily. A lot of people before you have learned to deal with that procrastination problem, don't you know? A lot of people before you have learned how to control this negative inner dialogue. You're just preparing the field, preparing the mind. Oh, it is possible. So stop complaining about it. It is actually possible. Shut up and listen. It is possible. First step, accept it. It is possible. Now let's get on the how. When somebody is too much complaining or too much refuting, confronting that, no, it's not possible for me, I'm way too fucked up, I'm way too stuck. People have learned, a lot of people before you have learned that even if they were complaining that much, they could actually find a solution by doing, and then you give your process, your metaphor, your embedded command, or whatever. 38, number 38, if a 5-year-old kid was describing it, kind of, again, shifting the words, shifting the perceptions, the representations you have about the problem. If a 5-year-old kid was describing it, how would he be describing it? And that way you would get much more playful, maybe? Much more playful about the problem, or much more vague about the problem. It could retarget your attention on some part of the problem that you didn't think about. Maybe a 5-year-old kid from the outside would just see some two adults playing a game he doesn't know yet. How can you know? You're not in his head, so how can you know? So using this perception can be really helpful, because a child sometimes has a much more creative mind, a much more open mind about how can that situation can be solved. I mean, if you apply the creativity of the child to yourself right now. Number 39. If you never had this problem, what would be different? Don't you think? If you never had this smoking problem, what would be different right now? It is I think of this one as a way of describing the goal the person has in a much better way, in a much more specific way. If you never had this problem in your life, what kind of life would you have right now? If the whole time you never known this problem, this smoking problem, this eating disorder problem, this bad parenting problem, if you never had this problem, what would be different? What kind of life would you be living right now? And you will get much more intuition, much more clues about the values of that person, about the deep motivations of that person, about what he wishes he could get in his life at this moment in time. Number 40. If there was a way to make this problem go away tomorrow, or just go tomorrow. If there was one simple way of making that problem leave tomorrow, if there was a way of doing that, what would it look like? How would you do it? If there was a very simple way, a very simple way of making that problem go away tomorrow, how would you do it? What would be different? What would happen after it happened? Time distortion. Starting to mixing all the stuff. Number 41. Yeah. Number 41. If you were saying with my own voice, how would that sound like? If you're saying this problem you have been complaining about for 1 hour, if you were saying those same words about your limitation, about that you cannot lose weight, blah, 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 if you're saying those words with my own voice, the voice of somebody who has already overcome a lot of limitations, how would that sound like? It would sound completely stupid? Yes, it is. Therefore, what can you do with that? Therefore, what does that change teaches you, actually? If somebody else repeating the same words as you wouldn't have this problem, so what would be different between you and that person? If I could solve the problem and not you, why? What would be different between me and you? I can do that? Oh, okay, so how can you learn it? If it is just a skill, if it is just a mental pattern, then how can you learn it? What prevents you from learning it? All this kind of destroying limitations, basically. If you're 5 years old kid, if you were saying, if you could look at yourself. If number 42, if you could look at yourself from a distance, basic dissociation, if you could look at yourself from a distance. It's also the submodalities shifting language, because you're shifting the submodalities going from the perception of being associated in the problem to, okay, dissociation. But instead of directing the person conscious mind into doing this kind of complex visualization, you could simply say, what if you could look at yourself from a distance? And just by using those words, look at yourself from a distance, the person will naturally dissociate from the problem, from the part of himself that has the problem. But it is conversational, so you're not directing the mind in a too confrontational way. You're just suggesting, what if you could just look at yourself from a distance? Number 43. If you had to describe this problem in 5 steps, what would those 5 steps be? If you had to describe the way you smoke too much, if you had to describe your strategy for smoking too much in 5 steps, what would those 5 steps be? That way you will get the whole mental strategy, the whole mental process of the person for engaging into some negative behavior. What would those 5 steps or 3 steps or 4 steps be? You would get a lot of clues and intuition about how exactly that person is putting himself or herself into such a negative situation. It's a very good way, and also to dissociate from the problem too. Number 44, if you could talk to that part of you, like if there is a part of you that is causing you to be angry all the time, if you could have a nice talk and a friendly talk with that part of you in a secured environment, if you could have a nice talk with that part of you, what would you say? How would you start a conversation? What would you say to prevent any fighting? What would you say to reassure that part of you? All these kind of things. Number 45, if this feeling was lighter, submodalities shifting, kinesthetic feeling, I feel stressed all the time. Okay, if this feeling was lighter, how would that change your current situation? If that feeling was lighter, if that feeling was so light that it is like a pillow, how would that change the situation actually? Number 46, if this voice was almost inaudible. Basically, the submodalities again, if a voice in your head is way too loud and like you keep getting angry or stressed about what somebody else told you, if that voice was so low that it was almost inaudible, how would that change the feeling? If you could just turn down the volume of the voice, how would that change the feeling, or how would that change the limitation? Number 47. If you were writing a conclusion to that story, I love that one. Somebody complaining all day long, somebody complaining all the time and running on the old same disc again and again, somebody always giving up the same bullshit. Okay, if you could just write a conclusion to that story, my friend, what would that conclusion be? If 2 years from now there was a conclusion to the story, what would it be? A major conflict? Okay, can you be more specific? Something would be better? Oh, so why not now? Why not? Why cannot it happen now? If there was a conclusion to the story, if there was an end, a positive end or negative end, depending on what it is, if there was an end to the story, what would it be? How would you act upon it differently? Number 48, from that new perspective, this one is kind of when you have already produced a change, when you have already produced some kind of change and you want to make the person validate and expand the change to other areas of his life or her life. From that perspective. So, okay, now you have understood why, deep reason of why do you smoke. From that perspective, how can you stop smoking or how can you reduce the amount of cigarettes you have? For example, from that new perspective, new is presupposing that some new behavior is possible that was not possible before. So if somebody came into your office and said it's impossible for me to quit smoking, I have tried every possible way, and then you just got to reframe one part of the limitation, then you could say from that new perspective, how do you think about a problem? Things like this. If you had to start number 49, if you had to start all over again tomorrow, if you had to start all over again tomorrow from the beginning, what would you do differently? If you had to start all over again tomorrow without this limitation, with knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? This one may not cause a direct solution, but it may cause a huge relief. Just imagining, just having the perception of, oh, it would be so great, could be enough for the person to find solutions by himself, just because you have removed the negative feeling. And when the negative feeling is removed, maybe the person will just come up with his own solutions by himself. He will not even need you. But you have helped him to relieve a little bit the negative feeling, for example. Number 50. Would you give that advice to somebody else? I love this one. This one was used on me one time and it really blew up my mind and really allowed me to reframe a lot of limitations. Would you give that advice to somebody else? If you keep judging yourself, or if you keep complaining, or if you keep treating your partner as a piece of shit, would you give that advice to somebody else? If there was a child watching you here, would you give that advice to that child? Would you tell that child to act the way you have been acting so far? No? So why do you do it? Things like this. Would you give that advice to somebody else? It shifts your perspective from if you are treating yourself badly or if you are having a very negative behavior toward others, just shifting the perspective of would you teach somebody else to do the same thing? If no, then why do you do it? And you will get to the core of the problem, the core of the limitation, the core of maybe the pain you have been holding the whole time, for example. Number 51, when putting this into light. This one is a slight modality shift. When somebody is like saying things like it's too dark, I cannot find my way into this whole darkness. If you could put this whole darkness into light, what would you do? If you could enlighten this whole situation, shifting the submodalities, enlighten this situation, what would be the first thing you would see that you were not seeing before? What is this new thing you are seeing right now that you have been enlightening this whole situation? If that person, number 52, if that person had never existed, when there is some major conflict with the person, with the partner, the parent, the kid, if that person had never existed, what would change? What would be different? If that person had never been part of your life, would you be happier or more sad? For example, if some guy is complaining about his girlfriend all day long, or the reverse, girlfriend complaining about her boyfriend, If that person had never been part of your life, what would you feel? How would you feel? And in that case, you would only get one of two extremes. Either it would be, I would be extremely sad, or I would be extremely happy. If it is, I would be extremely happy, then okay, so why are you still with him or with her? If you tell me that that person having never been here, you would be happier, then why the hell are you still with him or with her? Reverse, I would be extremely sad. Okay, so if when that person would have never been here, you would be sad, then can't you just stop complaining about some bullshit stuff and just love that person in the way he deserves or she deserves? Okay, just this question is kind of pushing the boundaries of how far this bullshit limitation is going to go. Okay, if that person had never existed, how would you act differently? Number 53, has there ever been a time where it's kind of finding a counter argument, kind of a sleight of mouth model too. Has there ever been a time where you were not smoking? Has there ever been a time where you were happy all day long? Has there ever been a time where you had friends and you were enjoying their company? Has there ever been a time where you were still in a good relationship with that person? Yes? Oh, okay, so what is different now? Exactly. More information and more solutions. If it wasn't a necessity to, this one is kind of mind-bending. If it wasn't a necessity, it's kind of confusing. If it wasn't a necessity to feel angry all the time, if the problem is anger, is unshakable anger, the person always feeling angry. If it wasn't a necessity to feel that amount of anger, what would be different? If it wasn't a necessity to be that angry, if it wasn't a necessity to treat people that badly, how would you treat them? Like, it is shifting the perception from I'm just stuck, I'm just like this, to oh, actually I force myself into the necessity of doing this. Therefore, if I have been forcing myself, I can also unstuck and unlock myself and do something else. It's like shifting the perspective and taking back the responsibility of being able to change. Number 55, who made the decision that you had to go on smoking? Who made the decision that your relationship had to be that bad? Who made the decision that you had to be that angry? Who made the decision that you had to be that anxious? And if the person just answers me, why? Why did you start this? When did you start this in the first place? Okay, it is your fault. When did you start it? That way you will once again shift the responsibility back to the person. It is especially useful for people who always give away the responsibility of their actions. Like, oh, it's not my fault, it's just the economy. Oh, it's not my fault, it's just my parents. Oh, it's not my fault, it's because my girlfriend tortured me. Everything is your fault. And even if it is not your fault in the beginning, then it is your fault of maintaining the negative feeling you have because of it. Therefore, you can always at least do something. Maybe not solve the whole situation right now, but at least you can always do something about it. Always. At least a minor thing. Relieve some pressure. Just calling somebody and saying what is the word? Not forgiving. Sorry, that you're sorry. You can always do at least one simple thing. At least one. Number 56. How did you came to that conclusion? How did you came to the conclusion that you were hopeless? How did you came to the conclusion that there was no hope? How did you came to the conclusion that you had to maintain that negative behavior? How did you came to the conclusion that you had to keep fighting like a beast all the time? How did you came to the conclusion that you had to be treated that badly? What was the process what was the series of decisions that led you to engage into that negative situation in your life, or that led you to get stuck in that situation at this current moment in your life? How did you come to the conclusion? Number 57 and last one, how do you know? This one is very generic. Whenever you have somebody giving you a limitation, whenever you have somebody giving you some bullshit complaint, some limitation that you just don't believe into, or some stuck state that I just cannot do anything, it's his fault, I cannot solve the problem, I'm gonna lose my job, there's nothing I can do about it. How do you know that? Very simple. How do you know that? What is the proof? How do you know that? And how do you know the reverse is not possible neither? Because if you're so sure about this, how can you be so unsure that the reverse is not possible? Stuff like this. Anyway, so you have all those language patterns, you can practice them, and if you want to go further, I've got a complete covert hypnosis tutorial in the description, in the first link, where you have not only the language patterns, but also the whole methodology, the whole structure to use them conversationally, no matter what is the topic of conversation, and how those words are actually influencing the unconscious mind. Like, those things are just random words you can use like this right away. It will be really helpful. And in my document in the description, you also have the whole structure of how exactly does language works, and how does the language, your language, can influence the subconscious of the people listening to you. It is completely free, and it is for you.